The first thing is the definition of land administration, because when we talk about titling, it's really a component of land administration. And this is the United Nations definition of land administration, which is the process of determining, recording, disseminating information about ownership, value, and use of land when implementing land management policies. And you'll notice that we don't talk about private ownership of land here. It is just a general statement of ownership, as there are many types. Part of the framework is the need for a land policy. I think it's very important. In many of the countries that I've worked, the informing of a policy is very, very important. And it lies at the heart, and land policy lies at the heart of everything that you're trying to do. Of course, a policy is usually an official statement by government, but it doesn't have the force of law. It's soft, if you will. It's meant to guide and inform. And of course, policy, land policy, touches on many spheres, whether it's urban, rural, economic, social, etc. The other component, and there's been much discussion about land legislation, is that land legislation, and you can't think of it even as a national context, because India signs up to many treaties, and so land legislation can, in fact, touch on international treaties, regional agreements that you might have, and so forth. And land law can be affected by many other laws which seem separate and distinct, but in fact can touch on it. Now, that's the discussion of the framework. On to land administration. Here's the bad news. This is a recent study by Transparency International of land worldwide in corruption, and you'll see that the reporting of persons in where they pay bribes in their daily life. Number one is the police, number two is the judiciary, and number three is land. Importance, spatial reference system. Your survey of India has a spatial reference system. And one of the ways that you can take advantage of technology is to have the spatial reference system modernized. And what I mean by that is the geodetic network that you have in place. Many countries now are moving away from the need to monument or physically identify these geodetic networks. Germany, for example, no longer uses monumentation. It has broadcasting signals, which it provides for GPS receivers to use. This is very important, because if you don't modernize some of the procedures, you'll be stuck monumenting, which was needed and done 100 and 200 years ago, but is extremely questionable now. Principles of land systems in every place are fundamentally the same. How you implement it, how you process it, and some of the laws that require different documents are, of course, different. Advances in computing technology, I think, offer India some real advantages if the network is in place, and that's what I refer to as cloud computing. New institutional and revenue models. I would really challenge you to be creative in how you think going forward, whether that's BOO schemes, BOT schemes, even public-private partnerships, the use of e-government, the use of e-commerce, e-conveyancing. These are great points for reduction of labor and time, increase in productivity, and increase in revenue. So, international lessons learned. Spatial data is key to property rights, but it also serves a very important need, because the type of spatial data you collect for property information is at the basis of so many other governmental needs, whether it be planning, health, education, and so forth. Collect once, use many times. If you do go in the field, try to do it so that you don't have to keep going back because of the cost to go in the field. Use various modes of spatial data tools and gathering, which hopefully I've given you a brief idea of. Blending scales and accuracies is acceptable. And I know there's probably some surveyors in the room who are shuddering at that statement, but it's very important to bear this in mind. Spatial data has considerable value, but if it's not maintained, that value decreases, and rather rapidly. Maintenance requires good governance. And emerging economies absolutely have got to look at partnerships with private sector to develop and sustain spatial data. So whether that's the likes of Google or foundations or private firms, television companies, utilities that have the need for so much of the same spatial data, by partnering you may be able to lower a lot of your upfront costs. And lastly, it obviously requires significant political will, which is in evidence here today. a famous statement by a Supreme Court justice in the US, that sunshine is the best disinfectant. An important point, incentives always overpower disincentives. The idea of positive systems, not negative systems. If you establish negative systems, I can guarantee you they won't work. And I'm not a big fan of mandatory or compulsory registration, because it typically doesn't work. People will fall out of the system, and one has to ask oneself, what do you do if you find somebody didn't register within a time period? Are you going to put them in jail? Are you going to seize their supposed property? Are you going to fine them? And are you willing and able to enforce that? Is that really the way that you want to focus? I would say focusing on the positive, focusing on incentivizing, getting people to say, I have a benefit and I'm willing to spend some time and money to register. Another quick example from China. I've bored a few of you with this example, so I beg your indulgence on this, but they had terrible problems with a collection of tax receipt revenue from simple GST or VAT sales of goods. So they looked at the Chinese character and they said, what simple low-cost thing can we do to increase tax receipts? And so they came up with a very simple idea that every receipt that would be given for the purchase of a bottle of water or any other good would actually be also a free lottery ticket. And once that was implemented, their tax receipts soared, because the people making the purchase were demanding the receipt. And so they were self-enforcing this process. So it's those types of things. And obviously different states and different cultures may have different triggers. But if you can think of those as well as the formal side of things, they tend to have a very lasting effect. Emphasize the need for legal and procedural reform and the development of human resources. Your system, particularly if you really go down the road of indefeasible title, because remember, a torrent system is an indefeasible title, meaning once it's issued, it cannot be defeated unless there is fraud, and you have to prove the fraud. So please bear that in mind. It's an indefeasible title. And in some countries where torrents has been implemented, the indefeasible title has been used by people to get rights to land that they may not own, and then they stand there with an indefeasible title. So the system itself is only as good as the people who are maintaining it and essentially providing the guarantee to the guarantee. And if that's a district office, then understand what that possibly means. Institutional reform, the need for single executive agencies, the need to keep the revenue that's generated for the most part. If you set up any authority and it doesn't keep the revenue or a large portion of the revenue that it's generating and it goes to a general fund, again, you're not likely to see much success and much sustainability. The best examples, Jamaica, for example, the National Land Agency in Jamaica keeps 80% of the revenue they generate. 80%, and as a result they pay significantly higher salaries, they constantly reinvest in data and technology, and they're constantly looking to reduce the time taken to transact with their agency. Integration of information is absolutely essential, sharing of information and integration, the creation of single layers of address so that it's not repeated many times across government agencies. The need to have a public service focus, there's no question about it, and the need for an informed public. Thank you very much.